Steve Yates is the senior fellow at America Policy First Institute and the chair of the China Policy Initiative. He joins us from his very secretive Lego bunker. Stephen, always so good to see you. This seems to me the equivalent of when Barack Obama leaned over to Medvedev and said, "Yeah, I'll have more flexibility after my election." Is that kind of what we're looking at after the 20th Party Congress with Beijing?
Well, there definitely is an element of that, and it's hard for me to try to strike the right balance in talking about Xi Jinping and where things are going, because there are a lot of things going very wrong inside of China. We've talked about those from time to time, but a faltering China that has a shrinking population, that has a shrinking workforce, that has some destabilizing elements, that they're bludgeoning into COVID-0 lockdowns, even during an earthquake. All of that crazy stuff is going on. And Xi Jinping is just sort of whack-a-mole trying to keeping things under control through this party Congress. But we should make no mistake, this is not like a national election. It's not like there's real competition here. The only question is, how much is he going to win by? And we're not going to have exit polling or vote counting and things like that
in this
kind of an exercise. He's going to win. So there definitely is something to the notion of coming out the other side. What are we dealing with? Well, for one, we're going to have a guy that goes back to going overseas. Since COVID, he hasn't gone anywhere.
And he's meeting overseas with Putin now.
Exactly. So this is the start of something different. Now, what is the different? We don't really get to know. We know what they bark at us about, what their demands are. They're very open about their support of Russia now. And so they're clearly aligned against us strategically. I would say economically, they've been aligned against us for a long time. It's just taken a long time for Americans to sober up about that. And so now we go into an election too. And I would argue the far more important question is, are Americans serious about whatever it costs and whatever it takes to rebuild the foundation of American resilience, American self-reliance, and the American way of life, or aren't we? That's going to have a much bigger impact on where all this goes. We get that right, it literally doesn't matter what the Communist Party of China decides it wants to do. We keep screwing things up for ourselves, and even a crippling, doddering along China can still be a big problem for us on viruses, unfair trade, and military adventurism.
Yeah, we're talking to Steve Yates, who's an expert on this and also worked in the Bush administration advising the administration on all of these issues. We're talking about, I mentioned just a second ago, Xi Jinping is going to be, for the first time he's leaving since lockdown, and his first time he's leaving is to meet with Vladimir Putin, who's not having a great go of things, apparently. If all the reports are accurate, he suffered, he had some pretty big losses over the weekend, and there are reports that they're kind of being pushed back from some of the most intense areas of fighting. What do you think they're going to talk about?
Well, I think they're going to talk about, hey, what kind of a discount could you cut me, brother, on some oil and gas? And the other one saying, hey, what kind of a discount can you give me on some armaments? And so it sure seems to me to be a pretty above board trade in terms of, it's not really secret what each side seeks in all of this. Neither one of them has a moral compass. Neither one of them has to face meaningful pushback internally. So it's really, how can we help each other push back against the United States? How can we help each other grind out whatever our challenges are? We've talked about the Russia-Ukraine thing for a long time, and I fear that it remains on this very long grinding trajectory that might be a very muddled outcome. We're heading into winter. Arguably, the Russians probably can go through that a little bit better than the West. With China, they've been pushing the limits on their territorial claims, war games, and things like that. But really, China needs fuel. China does not have an endowment of energy that can keep the lights on, and China is very vulnerable to a blockade from the United States and its allies. So I think they're both trying to guard against the impact of sanctions, both trying to guard against their weaknesses together.
This is real life the real life game of risk here. We're talking to Steve Yates. You can follow him on Twitter, which I suggest you do, at YatesComms. That's what I think of. I envision the risk board, like in how in Queen's Gambit they would look at the chessboard. I'm envisioning the risk board because China needs Russia's cheap energy. Russia needs help from China. And then at the same time, to kind of bring it all together, because there's all these moving pieces, everything affects each other. The new PM over in Britain, Liz Truss, comes out and says that they're going to reverse the ban on fracking. They're going to now start giving new leases out for oil and gas drilling in the North Sea. It seems like to me because of Russia really expedited or intensified this problem. If there was an excuse for these countries to become a little bit more energy independent, or for at least Europe by itself to be a little bit more energy independent, it seemed like they fast-tracked this with Ukraine, but they can still make it up losing that with China. Does that make the Russian-Chinese alliance stronger? And then what does that, because if these countries start doing this in Europe, I just feel like this is all moving in a bad way. I want them to be energy independent, but Russia will make it up somewhere.
Well, Russia will do what Russia's going to do to a degree, and the same for China. If I believed that this was a long-term trajectory that the United Kingdom and others were on, then I'd say that's a very strong way forward. One of the silver linings in this Russian invasion of Ukraine might be the sobriety checkpoint, that while people were trying to scare a generation that they're going to be choked by unclean air or unclean water, what really was happening was that they were in a suicide pact to choke off their energy and their economy. And we have the resources to run our economies, to run our societies, and we actually do it cleaner than anywhere else in the world. And so, even if you pray to the sun god, like some people apparently do, we still can do this in a way that is cleaner and more efficient and still take care of our manufacturing needs without having to deal with a dirty China with no quality control, or a dirty Russia. So if I believe this was the direction we're really going to go, I'd say, great. That is actually the best way to minimize the challenge of Russia and China, is we don't need them. We do our own thing.
I love how you tempered any kind of optimism I had with, well, that'd be great if they're going to stay on that on a long-term deal. It's not happening. So in other words, it's not happening. Don't get your hopes up. Because, they're going to be dealing with the energy crisis. That gives Russia so much more control in this relationship with China. And you and I have talked about this for well over a year, here and there. That would be one of the worst things that we could, because they were sort of they used to hate each other. Then they were frenemies. A necessary alliance. The worst thing that can happen is if they grow any closer. But I just look at, there's a lot of things on the board that could actually make that happen. If they see Europe, getting a little independent, in Ukraine, they're failing in Ukraine. That just means Russia has to rely on China more and vice versa. What are we looking at realistically here? Because it just, to me, is such a huge, the weirdo doesn't leave Beijing for 2 years. And his first visit is still shaky leg McPutin over there in Moscow.
Absolutely. And we can throw in, just to make it a trifecta,
oh boy,
if this courting of the mullahs in Iran continues, then you basically have supported the revival of an alternative axis of evil that is not trading in U.S. dollars, is not relying on access to our system, and basically trying to cover their mutual weaknesses, thus shielding them from whatever penalties the supposed international community could impose upon them. There's multiple fronts to this. China isn't really ready to go it completely alone. It wants Americans to continue to buy all their cheap crap. And I hope Americans do have access to all that cheap crap. But we can't have anything of strategic significance coming from a market like China. We have to strategically decouple from them. So right now we have the bad guys doing a better job of building their metaverse, and we're doing a terrible job of taking care of the real world. Right.
A practical question, last one for you, talking with Steve Yates at YatesComms on Twitter. And this is sort of an aside from all of this, and I may have in a roundabout way asked you this before, but more directly, if we desperately need the manufacturing manpower of a country with a population the size of China. Why did we not make India our best friend over them?
This is a question I've been asking for 30 years. And part of the answer to it is that India, while it doesn't do all the bad things that China does, they seem to have adopted Fabian socialism and other kinds of funkadelic thought to make it very slow to reform. And so there's definitely big opportunity. And I do try to impress upon all world leaders, if you thought that China was too big to ignore, then please don't ignore Asia's other billion people. But you can also look at Japan and Southeast Asia, and you would take that together, that's another billion people. I mean, you have all of this. The biggest sin of the last 50 years is thinking that China is the end all be all. Yes. And letting them get away with everything. Every one of these other countries or regions has a challenge, but it's not like it's work-free dealing with China anyway. So I've often felt like India is the place where time stands still, but I'd take that slow roll to somewhere over the dealings with a country that is willing to poison the world and take trillions of dollars out of our economy and turn around and say, what, you got a problem?
Yes. I have to note that Fabian socialism and funkadelic thought, if you ever came out with an album, if you ever chose to, that's it.
It's my memoir.
And slow, and then the subhead, slow roll to nowhere. Beautiful. I don't think it could be summed up any better. Steve Yates, as always, we so appreciate your perspective on this. It's so good to see you, my friend.
Thank you, Dana.
Take care. You take care.